Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Morris. I'm an educational psychologist. Thanks for joining me for this session. I hope you are all doing well. Please make yourself comfortable, get yourself a drink if you need to, and then I will get started. I am going to show a little slide presentation whilst I'm talking to you, so I'm just going to get that loaded now. Okay, so I'm going to talk with you today about the role of the educational psychologist and explain how we help children. I have been an educational psychologist for over 14 years. I trained at the Institute of Education and then worked for a couple of local authorities before moving into independent practice about 8 years ago. So what are psychologists? Well, essentially, psychologists are scientists. We are testing theories through experiments and research to try to better understand the reasons people behave the way they do and why we think the way we do. And psychologists, we use our knowledge of research to help to understand the people that we work with so that we can support them in making changes, bringing about more positive life experiences. So in terms of thinking specifically about behaviours, if you have a look at this picture here, seeing a child lick their shoulder might seem quite unusual. If you have a child with special educational needs or you work with children who have additional needs, then perhaps this might not be such an unusual thing to see a child licking themselves. Perhaps they are sensory seeking, but for many people it might seem a bit strange. Then if you put it into a different context of an animal in the wild who is cleaning themselves, suddenly a licking behaviour doesn't seem so unusual. So I like these pictures because they sort of highlight the essence of the role of the educational psychologist, which is to help with understanding, to try to make sense of why we do what we do, why children behave in particular ways, why they might find some things difficult at school, and then obviously to support the adults who are working with the children to enable them to make progress. So there's different types of psychology, and I'm just going to highlight a couple for you. The first type of psychology I want to talk about is neuropsychology. So psychologists who work in this field very much are interested in studying how the brains work and how they affect what we do. And this is really, really relevant in terms of understanding children and child development and how they learn and make progress at school. There's also clinical psychologists, and clinical psychologists very much think about how our experiences affect us and our behaviours. So what are the links between what we are thinking and what we're feeling? And they may do ongoing work with children in terms of providing therapeutic input. Some educational psychologists do also train in some of the techniques used by clinical psychologists, such as cognitive behaviour therapy. So there is a bit of an overlap between the roles, but primarily the clinical psychologist is underneath the health umbrella and does ongoing work with children, whereas educational psychologists work under the education setting, and our work tends to be more short-term with regards to exploring, understanding, and then making recommendations for how the adults working with the child long-term can support them. So as an educational psychologist, what we're doing is we're looking at how children learn. How do we learn? What affects our learning? What helps us to learn? And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about exactly how EPs do this coming up. So thinking a bit more about our role, in order to help, as I said, we need to understand. We need to understand a child's situation in terms of their education. What is their environment like? What are relationships like? What's working well for them? And why might they be struggling in some areas? So the role of an educational psychologist is to understand a child's learning, development, and behaviour in relation to their education. And we do this in various ways. So we're always looking to get the child's view, to try to understand through their perspective. Often children might not fully understand themselves, why they think certain things or why they're feeling certain things. Their experiences might not make sense to them. So part of our role is to help clarify that and help the child to sort of see things a bit clearer. But most importantly, we're trying to get insight into their view of the world. And often as adults, things might not make sense to us, why a child might react in a particular way. And it's important that we can understand how they are viewing the world so that we have a starting point in terms of knowing how to move forward. And just because something doesn't necessarily make sense to us, or we might not think it's a big deal, in a child's life, it might be a huge deal. So it is really, really crucial that we take that into account. As an educational psychologist, we understand the impact of experiences throughout a child's development. So even if we're working with older children, we're still going to want to explore their early experiences. So, for example, we might want to find out a bit about a child's early language development, their motor development. So did they speak? Did they crawl? Did they walk when they should have done? Because these can sometimes point to some delays or some underlying difficulties that might be continuing to have an impact for a child at school. And also we are going to be mindful of what we call attachment, which is how a child bonded with their primary caregivers. It's a really, really crucial part of a young baby and young child's development. And if you don't know much about attachment theory, I do recommend seeing if you can find a course to go on to find out a bit about it. But as a psychologist, it's important that we think about whether the child has formed secure attachments, because attachment basically enables a child to understand relationships and to know how to be with other people, and it affects how their brain develops. So it's just a really important part of the work that we do is thinking about early development. We also look at the environment. We're interested in the classroom environment, but also the playground environment, and certainly in larger schools and secondary schools, what we might call transition environments, so things like the corridors, which might seem a very small part of the child's day. They might not spend a lot of time there, but for a child who has additional needs, particularly if there are any sensory issues, then it can actually be quite a distressing part of their day. So we're looking at all aspects of a child's educational experience when we're exploring and finding out what is going on for them and what their experiences are. We also want to know about their relationships with the adults in the school and with other children, and explore a little bit about their own feelings and how they might be affecting them at school. So we know, for example, that if a child is anxious or is worried, it's going to affect their ability to maintain attention and remember information. And then in terms of doing assessment work, there are two main areas that we look at. All EPs work in slightly different ways, but if we're doing a full assessment, then two of the key areas we're looking at are intelligence and cognition. So what we mean by intelligence is our ability to understand, learn, and reason. Reasoning means thinking about something in a logical way and considering possible options to solve a problem. And then cognition is basically our mental process of thinking and knowing. So what's going on in our mind as it sorts and classifies information that we take in through our senses. So what we see, what we hear, what we touch. And our brain stores this information so that we can retain it and remember it, either in the short term or the long term. So before we carry on, if you would like, you can join in this short activity. What I'd like you to do is grab a pen and a piece of paper and see how many different types of memory you can think of. So you can pause the video at this point to make your list and then press play when you're ready. Okay, so I have listed here some different types of memory. I wonder how many you have come up with on your list. This is not an exhaustive list. And what I'll do is I will attach a link, a document that just gives a brief explanation of what each type of memory is, so that you can look at that after this presentation. But what I wanted to highlight is that there are a couple of key aspects of memory that we do focus on as educational psychologists. So we don't test for all of these when we work with a child, because obviously we don't want them to spend hours and hours and hours being tested and tested and tested. What we do as educational psychologists is very much try to focus on the types of cognitive skills that we know most often cause difficulty for children if there's an area where they're struggling. So what I've done is I've highlighted in green the types of memory that are commonly looked at by educational psychologists. Okay, moving on. You might be wondering where educational psychologists work. Obviously, we work with families and we work with schools, but actually there's quite a broad range of settings that we work. As I mentioned at the start, some EPs work for a local authority, which is where I started off, and others work in independent practice. We also, as well as working in schools, we work with a huge range of professionals in different types of education settings. So not just mainstream or specialist schools, but children's centres and nurseries and colleges and universities. So there's quite a wide range of different settings that we will visit and different types of education practitioners that we work with. Many local authority services now have integrated multidisciplinary teams where educational psychologists work with practitioners from health or social care or other education practitioners such as advisory teachers, and they work in teams to provide training and support, utilising their skill sets and working together with the schools that they have in the area. But also educational psychologists do work with the Youth Justice Service. This might seem a bit strange, but I thought I would share some statistics with you to help you sort of have a sense of why actually it's quite an important role when we work with young offenders. These statistics are from an article by One Education. And it actually they're quite sad statistics, and for me they sort of highlight that actually we've still got a very long way to go in making sure that we really identify and support children with additional needs early on. Okay, so young offenders are 60 to 90% more likely to have speech, language or communication difficulties. This is compared to 10% of the general population. Youth offenders are 30% more likely to have ADHD. That is 5 times higher than the general population. And they are 20% of young offenders will have a learning disability, and this compares to 2 to 3% of the general population. So you can see that working with a variety of services, hospitals, social services, the role in being able to identify and make recommendations for how to support children when they struggle with their learning or development is really, really crucial. When I was working for one local authority, I remember I was seconded to work with a social services team and looking at how we can support the educational attainment of children in care. And for me, I really enjoyed it. It was really, really different. And I got to use my skills in a whole different setting, a different way. So if you didn't know much about the EP role, hoping that you're now being able to see that actually it's quite diverse. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that diversity in our role moving on. So in terms of who we work with, the age range is any age basically. Typically, EPs will work with children from about the age of 3, though we will work with children very, very young, but certainly many aspects of development become more apparent when a child becomes a toddler. But educational psychologists work with adults as well, from students at university right through to adults who have struggled all their life and wondered why they found school so hard and struggled with aspects of their work life in their employment. And educational psychologists do also work to help adults find better ways that they can be supported in their workplace, or identify what tools they need to enable them to be able to be more effective and carry out their jobs with as little stress as possible, accommodating for any difficulties they may have that they hadn't previously realised. And also, in terms of children in schools, educational psychologists will work with children with any kind of background, any kind of need at all. As I said, it's a very broad and diverse role, and we're trained in a very wide range of child developmental conditions and difficulties. So, as well as learning, other factors that we might be thinking about might include motor development, how a child's difficulties with handwriting might be affecting their learning, their communication skills, ability to develop friendships and what that's meaning for their experience at school, any emotional needs and how that might be a barrier to their learning, and attention skills, for example, or anything and everything that might be a difficulty for a child. Is something that we aim to try to understand, and also to build on a child's strengths. It's not just about what they find hard, but more on that coming up. So what do EPs do? How do we work with children, families and schools to enable us to have a positive impact? Well, there are various different approaches that are used and different types of work that we do. The first I'd like to talk about is something called consultation. So this essentially might seem like a meeting whereby a psychologist will meet with parents and staff and sometimes young people as well, and have what seems like a meeting. But essentially what the psychologist is doing is using various questioning techniques that they've been trained in to be able to better understand a situation, gather everybody's perspective and do a bit of problem solving. And the idea behind a consultation approach is that it is a plan, do, review approach. So you have your initial meeting, you do a bit of problem solving and you come up with some actions to put in place. You then do that, so the teachers in school might put things in place. As parents or carers, you may put things in place at home. And then you review, you come back and you have another meeting where you discuss and you reflect and a bit more problem solving. And then you move back into that do, review cycle. In terms of individual work with children, many educational psychologists will be keen to observe children in their education setting. It can be limited in the information that you can gather when you're working with the child individually. For example, you can't really see their social interaction with other children. So it's quite useful to get a sense of how they are with others in their school setting, but also to get a feel for the environment. And sometimes there are things that are picked up on just by being able to sit back and observe, which is something, it's a luxury for me, I feel, when I get to go in and sit and watch a child in their environment. It's a luxury that the teaching staff just don't have, and you can gather so much useful information just by sitting and looking. But that's just part of the assessment process. The main part of the assessment process is where we become those scientists again, and we are hypothesizing and we're asking questions and using various test materials to try to answer those questions and see where our hypotheses lead us. So if, for example, I'm asked to work with a child and I'm told that actually they're really struggling to listen and to pay attention, my hypotheses are going to range from everything from being able to understand language and sensory processing through to avoiding work they find difficult because of a learning difficulty, or maybe having neurodiversity such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Many of the assessment tools used by psychologists are standardized, which means they have been trialed and tested on lots of different children from all sorts of backgrounds across the ages, so that when we're looking at how a child performs in a test, we can see, get an idea of whether their performance is as we'd expect for their age, and try to get a sense of where their strengths are and where their difficulties might be, because we know from how the test has been developed how children typically would perform. But we don't just use standardized assessments. There are all sorts of psychological techniques that we're trained to use that we might apply when working with different children on a case-by-case basis. It's very much about the purpose of any individual piece of work and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help. EPs will do a lot of report writing where we are presenting our findings, what we've done, how we've gathered lots of background information through talking to families and schools, or maybe we've had some referral forms that we've asked to be filled in, pulling together all that information from the observation and the assessment, and then basically presenting our findings and our recommendations in the report. And sometimes parents find it useful to use an educational psychology report as part of a request for an education, health and care plan assessment. Now, an EP report doesn't mean automatically you will get an EHCP agreed, but what it provides is a better understanding of a child's strengths and any difficulties they have and what they might need in terms of support being put in place. And so this can help when you're submitting your request for an EHCP, can help the panel at the local authority to better understand the child as well. It's part of all the information that's gathered that you're presenting. Educational psychologists can diagnose learning difficulties, whether these are specific difficulties such as dyslexia or dyscalculia, or a more general, like moderate learning difficulty. And in terms of our skill set in being able to make such diagnosis after our initial training, educational psychologists are required to do a certain amount of continued professional development, and it is our individual duty of care to make sure that we keep up to date with our training and understanding of research in order to make sure that we are able to carry out our role in making a diagnosis if it's needed. Some educational psychologists attend tribunals. This is where there might be a disagreement between families and local authorities about a child's provision. And so some EPs particularly enjoy doing that aspect and going down the route of providing assessments for legal cases. We do a lot of training in a lot of different areas. Many educational psychologists will develop particular areas of interests or specialisms that they might focus on in developing their training. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of the other training I've done through Studio TV. But also we do research and project work, looking at how we can develop evidence-based solutions to support children. So as well as the understanding, obviously, it's really, really important, but as adults you want to know, okay, so now I understand my child needs help with this, how do I do that? And so some educational psychologists go down the route of being involved in project work where they can help answer some of those questions and help develop resources based on their interests or specialisms. I mentioned before that some EPs train in therapeutic work like cognitive behaviour therapy, and also you might find educational psychologists publishing their research or appearing in the media. All right. If I look in a little bit more detail about the assessment process, I just wanted to highlight the key aspects here so you can really get a sense of what it would mean if a child you work with or your child is going to have an educational psychology assessment. So the first part is looking at communicating. So thinking about talking and gathering information, forms being filled in. This is the early part of the work that we do, whether it's a phone call or an email, getting the whole process started and explaining the process in detail. And it's really important that you know that it's absolutely fine to ask questions if you first when you first speak to an education psychologist, if one is going to be working with your child, or if you're in an education setting and you want to know a bit more about exactly what's going to happen, please ask lots of questions. It's really, really okay to do that. Then, as I've said, we carry out the assessment part, which might include observations. And then we are looking at interpreting that information, analysing test scores, pulling everything together before writing that report. And what I want to emphasise here is that it's not just about problems. Educational psychologists are trained to think about how we can use what the information we've got in terms of what's working well for a child, how we can use that information and build upon it when we're giving our recommendations. So it's not just about finding out what children can't do. We really want to know what they can do and why can they do that, what's helped them to do that, what about their own brain development is helping, but also the relationships, their environment, the teaching approaches being used, what is working well, and how can we build on that and apply that in different ways to move forward. So to summarise and give you some key points to take away with you, our job is to help others understand why a child is having difficulty in their education, in their development, and how they can be taught so that we can help them to make progress. As well as enabling adults to understand, it is really important that children understand why they might find some things difficult and know their own strengths. Many of the children I work with will self-label because they don't understand why they find something hard, why they're struggling. So they might be calling themselves stupid or be very, very down about learning, have quite a negative attitude towards learning because they just don't understand. But not only do they not understand why they're finding it difficult, they don't recognise their own strengths and how to build on them. So that's really, really key to the EP role as well. And it's not just about labelling. If we're making a diagnosis, it's not about giving a child a label for the sake of it. Labels themselves, they help adults, I think, more than children, because they help an adult have a sense straight away of the type of difficulties a child may have, and therefore how they may need to adapt and be different. But actually it doesn't tell us about the child's individual specific needs. It doesn't tell us about who the child is as a person either. For me, this is why I believe that detailed assessment is really important, so we can get a really clear picture about what if it is a diagnosis, what that means for a particular child, and even if there isn't a diagnosis, we have a clear understanding of their difficulties, but also their strengths and how they can be supported to move forward. Because obviously we need to be able to understand the child to know how to help and which are going to be the best interventions and strategies to put in place for support. I hope you found this talk helpful. You can find me on social media at EdPsych4Kids. I also have a Facebook group that you're very welcome to join, Top Tips for Learning and Child Development, where I share lots of resources and information. We have a bit of fun, so you're very welcome to join as a parent or carer, or if you work with children and just looking to get lots of tips and ideas, please do come and check it out. We have various professionals that are part of the group as well who are always happy to answer questions, such as speech therapists, other psychologists, occupational therapists. I have a YouTube channel that I post some videos to, so free tips and advice. If I do any Facebook Lives, the videos will get put on YouTube afterwards as well. And I mentioned earlier that I have got some courses through Studio TV, so if you're interested, at the moment there is a course on trauma, bereavement and loss, which unfortunately is really relevant at the moment, with many children struggling through the pandemic. Either they have sadly had a bereavement, or they're just finding the emotional impact of whether it's lockdown or just the anxiety and stress of living through a pandemic can be very difficult for them. So I have made the course free whilst we're back in lockdown again. So please go and have a look. It's packed full of information and resources. It's an area that I'm really, really passionate about. So I was really keen to get it online whilst I'm limited in the face-to-face training that I can do. There is also a course on ADHD as well, where I explain everything about ADHD and the ADHD brain and how you can support children both in the classroom and at break times, and look at some of the more recent research into ADHD as well. Thank you very much for joining me. Keep safe and enjoy the rest of your week.
Hey, it's Ian here at Studio TV. Thank you so much for joining us here at Getting It Right for Me Live. Let me ask you a really quick question. Are you here because you are hoping to develop your skills and your knowledge and all your learning and understanding around supporting and caring for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities? I assume that's what you've come here for. We hope that you're enjoying your time here with us. There's some amazing people, and we're so grateful for them coming and being part of this. And we're so grateful for you to be joining us as well. There's a couple of things I just really quickly wanted to introduce you to. First of all, don't forget that you can upgrade your ticket at any time to one of the paid tickets, which we try to keep the price as low as we possibly can, just to cover what we need to help out the speakers a little bit, and make sure this event is as good as it can be. What that means is you can access the live Q&A sessions that we're running throughout the event, and you can access all the sessions for up to a year afterwards if you buy one of those paid tickets. Check out the whole school ones. How that works is if you book a whole school ticket, and you can pay online, or you can drop us a line and we'll issue an invoice and we'll sort it all out. That's absolutely fine. But we'll then make it possible for all your staff to be able to access all the sessions here at Getting It Right for Me Live this year. So do hope that's helpful. The other thing I want to mention is, and there are lots of members joining us this week, so thank you so much to those of you who are members, but we have put together, if you're looking to go deeper and access ongoing support and help and training, either as an individual, as a parent, as a professional supporting someone with additional needs, in a school or educational setting, or from a professional point of view, we have put together here at Studio TV with Lynn McCann and her team at Reach Out ASC a fantastic membership that starts at just £10 a month and includes a wide range of courses to help you support those in your care. There's a load of resources and tools, printable things that you can use to work with those children, support them. And there's more content being added all the time. One of my favorite parts of the membership is there is a peer group community that's built into that. So you can ask questions of Lynn and her team and your peers, built right into that membership as well. As I say, it starts at just £10 a month. Whole school memberships are there. We're offering trust-wide memberships, and local authorities have started to get in touch and offer this to their staff across a range of schools as well. We would love for you to join our community. If you've got any questions on that, drop us a line, but very much hope to see you there. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the event.